In Lebanon today, there was talk of a ceasefire, yet the sound was still of war. As the Israeli Security Cabinet met to discuss an agreement to end the fighting, the Israeli Defense Forces launched a massive wave of strikes right across Lebanon. With more than 10 dead and the dust still settling, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on his cabinet to approve the ceasefire deal. Speaking this evening, he said Israel had set Hezbollah back decades and that a ceasefire now means they can focus on the Iranian threat. There had been a marked ratcheting up in attacks in recent days, with more than 30 killed in Lebanon from Israeli strikes on Monday. And yet this could be the last of the devastation and destruction, at least for now, and at least in this pocket of the Middle East. Hezbollah began firing into Israel following Hamas's attack of October the 7th and Israel's subsequent assault of Gaza, a show of solidarity among the two Iran-backed groups. The tit-for-tat exchange of missiles lasted nearly a year and led to around 60,000 Israeli citizens having to leave their homes in the north. It was this that Israel gave as its reason for escalating. In September, they assassinated Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah in a massive strike in Beirut, and days later launched a ground invasion of southern Lebanon. Israel says it's now killed more than 2,000 members of Hezbollah, but the war has displaced 1.2 million Lebanese citizens, and the death toll stands at more than 3,700, many of them civilians. Now, after 13 months, a deal. Reports suggest that the ceasefire is roughly based on UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which brought to an end the last conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006. The first stage of the agreement will see the withdrawal of all Israeli forces from southern Lebanon within 60 days. At the same time, Hezbollah will pull back its armed presence north of the Litani River. That's about 16 miles from the Israel-Lebanon border. The Lebanese army, along with existing UN peacekeepers, will then provide security in the buffer zone, with the US chairing a 5-country committee to monitor any infringements of the agreement. The US has also agreed to give Israel a letter of assurance that they will retain the freedom to strike Hezbollah if it poses a threat. Something vital in trying to sell this ceasefire deal to those displaced by the conflict. Most of them have spent months living in hotels like here in Haifa, and they do not believe the threat of Hezbollah has gone.
We don't feel safe, and if we finish now, it will, the weapon will stay there for the future Hezbollah people.
This is southern Lebanon today. Israel's assault has left a wasteland where once there were villages. For Netanyahu, he has successfully ravaged Hezbollah's military capabilities and killed its top leaders. But at what cost to the Lebanese people stuck in the middle, with any ceasefire potentially just a pause in a Cold War always on the edge of heating up? And what of the source of this war? Gaza, where fresh rubble lies atop more than a year's worth of constant bombardment. Talks of a ceasefire here are long forgotten, and yet the need for an end to the war is as great as the desperate clamour for food in Khan Yunis.
Well, joining me now from Beirut is Lebanese MP and former Deputy Prime Minister Ghassan Hasbani. Thanks so much for coming back on the programme, Mr. Hasbani. Apparently the bombing is still going on in Lebanon, perhaps even in Beirut. How does it feel to be bombed into a ceasefire?
Yeah, this is basically a ceasefire under fire. These are the last hours before any potential declaration in the early hours of the morning, tomorrow morning, of an agreement. This is pretty much an agreement predominantly between Hezbollah and Israel, also covered by parts of the Lebanese government under a certain process and sponsored by the US and various other countries, hopefully that it would lead to a more permanent solution later on.
Right. So it gives you some breathing space. Is it enough to allow Lebanon, with all its incredible economic difficulties, to rebuild, to become a viable state again?
Well, the ceasefire for 2 months is more of a trial period to ensure the implementation of UN Resolution 1701 practically. And this is basically what it practically is all about. Definitely, as we've been hearing on the Lebanese side from the displaced people, as well as on the Israeli side, that people are still a bit cautious about returning home, about going back to normal life until this becomes a permanent situation. So it's a very fragile ceasefire given the conditions that have been put in place. But nevertheless, it's a practical implementation of UN Resolution 1701 that was effectively voted on almost 18 years ago after the Israeli war in 2006.
Hezbollah has been severely weakened by the Israeli onslaught of recent months. Do you welcome the fact that Hezbollah has been put into a box?
Well, we were actually hoping, and we called for, as the opposition parties in Lebanon, for a peaceful implementation of UN resolutions, particularly 1701 and 1559, that call for the withdrawal from the south of the Litani River, dismantling the military capabilities and the handover of weapons to the legitimate and sovereign Lebanese armed forces to be all under the Lebanese government, sovereign government umbrella. Yet these calls were never met. Today, unfortunately, they had to be done in such difficult circumstances with such huge losses to the Lebanese people, the Lebanese economy. Right. And we're going back to something that was agreed upon back in 2006. So at least let's hope that something positive will come out of this, with all the unfortunate losses of lives and property and economic losses as well.
And finally and briefly, you are going to live under the constant potential threat of Israeli bombardment should Hezbollah try something on again, as the Prime Minister said just a few minutes ago. How does that feel? I mean, as a former Deputy Prime Minister, as a member of the Parliament, how does it feel to have that constant Israeli threat hanging over you?
Well, this has always been the case to a large extent, except that the bombardment hasn't happened so frequently. It used to happen, violations of airspace have happened most of the time in the past, and many times in the past. But definitely, this is an issue with the sovereignty of the country. We were hoping, as a sovereign state, would actually be able to implement UN resolutions so that it would retain its sovereignty. The sovereignty was breached by the existence of Hezbollah and the support of Iran militarily to Hezbollah for many, many years as well on Lebanese territory. And so was the Israeli overflights and interference every now and then. So if this period is only a temporary period to ensure that the agreement stands, this would eventually lead to a withdrawal of the Israelis and a more permanent solution. And let's hope we will get to that eventually.
Ghassan Hasbani, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm now joined by Miri Eisin, who is a retired colonel from the Israeli Defense Force. She worked with Prime Minister Ehud Olmert during the last Lebanon war and is now a fellow at the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Thank you very much to you, Miri Eisin, for coming back on our programme. Let me start, first of all, with this. Do you think the Israeli government agreed to this ceasefire because they were running out of ammunition, as the Prime Minister indicated today, or because the Americans were putting pressure on them?
I don't think that the two actually contradict. And I'll add in that nobody here wants a war, Matt. This isn't about something that we want it to go on forever. It's a question of what you can continue to achieve, both against Hezbollah inside Lebanon right now, without at the end really completely destroying this country called Lebanon that hosts them. And listening to Mr. Hasbani before, it's really that challenge of Hezbollah being in Lebanon. They are Lebanese, they are Arabic, they speak Arabic. And so for us, it's not about Lebanon. It's about Hezbollah and what you can achieve.
But the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, that is, also just said that they will now focus more again on Hamas and also on Iran. What does that mean, do you think, focusing on Iran?
The Prime Minister has been very consistent, Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'll even say from 2009, he's been our Prime Minister for many years, in focusing on Iran. And in its own way, it's as if that the Hamas attack on October 7th, that part of the reason, just part of the reason for the failure, is because the Prime Minister was looking at Iran and did not see Hamas. But I say that right now, that at the end, Iran itself, as a country, 90 million strong, backing Hezbollah, backing the Houthi, attacking Israel twice directly, and their quest for the nuclear bomb is very scary. So I'm all for focusing on that. Having said that, we still have what's called the Gaza front, the Hamas front, and 101 hostages that are still in the Gaza Strip.
Just a couple of things. I mean, it's interesting watching Mr. Netanyahu wear his red tie tonight, which he doesn't normally wear. I wonder if he's channeling Donald Trump there. Does he believe that Trump will give him an opportunity, to attack Iran on a wider scale and perhaps cause regime change there?
I don't think that Israel has the capability to do regime change. And I would say in that sense, there's a difference between targeting the nuclear facilities, because those nuclear facilities don't threaten Israel, Matt, they threaten the world. Nobody wants Iran to be nuclear. But there is a difference between that and regime change. I do think that this prime minister feels that he will have an easier conversation with President Trump. I don't know if that's right, but I think that the prime minister thinks.
Of course, the Americans hope that this will now pave the way for some kind of ceasefire in Gaza. 44,000 people have been killed in Gaza, most of them civilians. It's been a terrible tragedy for Gaza, but also it's isolated Israel more than you might have imagined a year ago. Isn't it time for the right pressure to be put on Netanyahu to end this Gaza thing and try and come up with some sort of solution for the Palestinians and rebuild?
I wish it was as easy as that. You do realize that on October 8th, or for that matter, yesterday or today, all Hamas have to do is give back 101 hostages and it's done. That this is about Hamas attacking us, taking the hostages, doing horrific things, building themselves inside the civilian community. I'm not saying it's an easy, simple one. I do think that we have to find a resolution. I don't think anybody should be using right now the terms of peace. I think that that's a challenging one right now. But yes, to arrive at an end to this overt, horrific fighting.
Miri Eisen, thank you very much indeed.